Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. My name's Nader. This is going to be a follow-up to array maps where we're going to go through a bunch of exercises to actually get really familiar with maps. This is actually one of my favorite topics. I spent some time making these exercises that range from being a little bit easier, quote unquote, all the way to quite complicated. So I highly encourage you to join me on these exercises. Let's get right into it. Okay. So as with the previous videos, we have a bunch of files here. I have comments kind of listed out with the instructions. I encourage you to kind of read through them. I'm going to give a quick kind of run through of it, and then maybe you can pause the video and try out the exercise yourself before we go through the solution together. So for the warm-up, let's go through these steps. We want to create an array called practice with the numbers 25 through 30 inclusive. Okay, then it seems pretty easy. Create another array using map that squares each number in practice. Okay, and we want to print out both practice and the new mapped array. Perfect. So give that a shot and then let's go through it together. Okay, so to do this, we want to first create practice. So we're saying const practice. If you did let, that's totally fine. I just know that we're not actually going to change practice, and this is proven by map. So I'm going to stick with const for this. And we're going to create an array, which is square brackets, and then the numbers 25 through 30 in this case. So 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, and 30. Perfect. Then step 2 is to create another array using map that squares each number in practice. I didn't say the name for this, but let's just call it squares. So I'll just say const squares, and this is going to map over the practice array. So we're going to take practice, we're going to call the map method on it, and again, this only works on arrays, and this takes a function as its argument. So I'm going to give it a function just like this. Now the function, we automatically get as an argument each item in the array as it's being mapped over, so as it's being looped over basically. So I'm just going to give it a name so it's easier to understand what's happening inside the function. If you really wanted to, you could put like X or A or ABC. However, I highly encourage you to create legible names that make sense as you read through them, so it's easier to read your code, especially if you come back to it in the future. So in this case, this is an array of numbers. I'm going to put number singular because we're going to get each number one at a time. Now remember, map needs to return back what we want to be put in the new array. And in this case, we want to square each number, which means that we multiply it by itself. So we're going to return each number, and you can do this a few ways. You can say number multiplied by itself or number to the power of 2. I'll just go with this for now, and let's see what happens. So I want to log out practice, and I want to log out squares. Just going to pull up my terminal over here, make sure I'm in the correct directory using ls or dir if you're on Windows, depending on which terminal you're using. And I'm going to run, let me just clear this out actually, I'm going to run node Warmup Exercise. Perfect. So I'm assuming that is correct. Looks to be correct just based on some quick math in my head. At least the last one seems correct. I'm pretty sure 25 squared is 625. So looks like this is working. I just want to point out one thing. I'm going to emphasize this over and over again because it's really important. If you forget to return something, so if you just did a console log in here, or you just did a statement like this, and we rerun this, you'll see that we get undefined, right? And this is because a return statement of undefined is automatically inserted for every function in JavaScript that doesn't return something by default explicitly, right? Or something explicitly. We get put the default value, which is undefined, for a function return. So be very careful with this. Make sure that you're always returning something in a map, so you don't accidentally get undefined in your result array. And if we run this, we get back our correct answer. Perfect. Let's go to the first exercise. All right. So for this one, we want to create an array, called bools with these booleans in it. Then we want to map over bools, and we want to do the following. If the item we're mapping over is true, we want to return a random number in its place. This is interesting. Let's spend some time to think about that one in a second. If the item is false, we want to return 0. Okay, cool. We want to print out both arrays. I have a hint here on how to kind of do this interesting part, which is how to return a random number. So make sure to use Google, and we want to see how we can do that if you don't know how to do that already. Give that a shot, and then we'll go through it together. All right, so let's start going through this, and then we'll do some Googling together. So I want to create a array. I'll do const. I'll call it bools, just bools. And it's going to be this array. So I'm actually just going to copy and paste this to save us some time. There we go. Then what we want to do is we want to map over bools and then do some functionality. So I'm just going to set that up. And we want to print out this array later, so I'm actually going to assign it to another variable. I'm just going to call this, let's say, mapped bools. And this is going to take bools, it's going to call map on it, and map takes a function just like this. We're always going to get one item every single call to this function, and it's going to be called that many times for each item in the array. So in this case, we have 6 items, 6 bools. It's going to be called 6 times, once for each boolean. So I'm just going to say we're going to get one boolean value. Okay. So if this boolean that we're looking at is true, so in these cases it's true. So first 2 loops of this map, we want to do something with these true values. We want to return a random number in its place. So the hint was to Google for random number JS or JavaScript to find a random number function built into JavaScript to use. Let's do that. I'm going to go ahead and open Google Chrome. I have Google open over here. I'm going to Google for JavaScript random number. Okay. Depends on how you Google this, you might get different results. If you've seen these videos before, you know that I like to use MDN web documentation. I encourage you to do the same. However, any documentation really is okay. So if we go there, we can see that the math random function looks to be the thing that we're looking for. It returns a floating point, whatever that is, pseudo random number greater than or equal to 0 and less than or equal to 1. Okay. Good enough, I guess. Seems like we can just use this. Maybe we can make it more fancy later. Let's just go with this, whatever the heck this ends up doing. So it's saying that we can just use math with a capital M and then dot random. So if we do math dot random, and we'll call this because it's a method or a function, and make sure that we return this. Okay. So let's just see what happens if we do this right away. So notice I'm not even checking bool or using it at all. I'm just returning math.random for every single item in this bools array. So I should actually get 6 whatever random returns. So I'm going to log out both of these arrays. I'm going to log out bools, and I'm going to log out mapped bools, which is what I called it. Let's run this exercise 1. Interesting. Okay, so line 21 is this one right here, true, false, false. And then this is our mapped array, a bunch of random numbers. This is kind of strange, right? Because these are all between 0 and 1, but it's good enough for our purposes. It's just a random number. I just wanted you to get some experience looking up these functions, maybe even playing around with these numbers to get some other kinds of results, like multiplying it by numbers or adding it by numbers, just to see kind of what you can come up with. Now, this is technically not what we want. We want to only return a random number if bool is true. If it's false, we want to return 0. So what we need is an if statement, right? We want to say if bool is true using triple equals, then we want to return math.random. Otherwise, it's false, so we want to return 0, just like this, okay? Let's see what we get if we run this. So if I run this, it looks like for the 2 trues, I get the random number. For false, I get 0. Then for another true, I get a random number. And then false, false, I get 0, 0. Perfect. Look at that. That's the answer right there. So you might have noticed from previous videos that if we have something like this, we can shorten it a little bit. So since bool is already a boolean, we can actually get rid of this check because it's already a boolean value. So if I do this, and I run this, you can see that I get the same results, right? So if true or if false. And since it can only be true or false, this is a binary thing, I can actually get rid of the else, because if it's gonna fail this test, then it's already false, right? So I can return 0 right away, and if I run this, you'll see I still get the same result. Not really the same result because it's always generating different random numbers, but technically the correct result. There is fancier versions of this, which we'll get into as we learn some newer syntax in JavaScript. However, this is perfectly fine and acceptable, and very, very readable as well. Perfect. Let's go to exercise 2. Okay, so for this one, we want to create an array called prices, and we want prices to kind of look like these numbers right here. So this looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different numbers. Then we want to create another array using map called tax prices, and this is going to do something with this array. If the price is greater than 10, okay, so like this one, 19.99, 85, 32, and that's it, then we want to add a 20% tax to it. Otherwise, we don't want to add any tax. Okay, so another way of saying this is if the price is greater than 10, then we want to add a 20% tax to it. So it'll be a higher number. Otherwise, we don't add any tax. So we just kind of return it directly without adding any tax to it, without manipulating that number at all. Then we want to print out both arrays. So give that a shot, see what you can come up with, and we'll go through it together. Okay, so I'm going to create a variable called prices. And I'm going to point it to this right here, which is this list of prices. Then we want to create the tax prices variable. And I'm going to say map over prices. And we're going to give it a function. And we want to call this function for each item inside prices, which is a number in this case. So I'm going to say price. Notice how this reads, by the way. Most of the time when you're using map in different frameworks like React, for example, or on backend development, you probably end up having the array be some plural value. And you're gonna, if you're mapping over it or using these functional methods, you're usually gonna have a singular version of that plural thing. So prices, price. If we had like animals, animal. Right? Names, name. That would be an example. I highly encourage you to use kind of that pattern or that process. It really, really helps with readability. And if other people look at your code or your coworkers are looking at your code, they will be very happy than if you were just to use something like, imagine if I just said like XYZ. That would be much more confusing and less clear as our intention for this map. Okay, so what do we want to do? If the price is greater than 10, add 20% tax to it. Okay, so you can probably get used to this now as you're seeing these kinds of questions. So if the price, notice how this is already reading quite nicely, is greater than 10, right? Then what do we want to do? I want to add a 20% tax to that price. So we want to take that price and we want to add 20% tax to it. So there's many ways to do this. I'm just going to go with probably one of the easier ones, which is multiplying it by like 1.20 or 1.2, which is effectively taking it and adding a 20% tax. If it's not greater than 10, that means it's less than 10. So I can do an else. And in this case, we want to not add any tax. We just want to return the number directly. So to do that, we can just return back the price as its original value. Okay, this is a bit weird when you see this because it's like, well, why are we returning the value right back? But this is totally valid. We can just return it and basically create a copy of that value. So if I do console log here and I log out my prices, and then I say, here is my tax prices, and then we pull up my terminal and I run node exercise 2, it looks like it seems like this kind of works. So we're getting some funky results, a little bit weird, but let's kind of see what's happening. So here we have prices, original prices, right, which is line 12, and I'm logging out line 22. But the funkiness comes in here. For numbers that are greater than 10, we're going to hit this condition and we're going to return that number multiplied by 1.2. Now, I haven't used any like rounding or kind of trimming of these decimal places, and JavaScript likes to be as precise as it can be where possible. In this case, this has to do with how numbers are represented kind of behind the scenes inside the computer, and you can kind of get very funky looking, long numbered variables like this. Doesn't matter for now, it's totally okay. We can actually chop these off or shorten them later with different methods very easily. But most importantly, let's see if our code worked. So for number 19.99, we actually looks like we added some tags to it. For 85, it looks like we added some tags to it right there. For 32, it looks like we added some tags. And then for 8 and 5.2, we actually didn't add anything. So those remain the same, and same with 1.23. So that seems to work just fine. So similar like before, since these are mutually exclusive cases, we can actually get rid of the else, just like this, and just shorten the code a little bit, just like that. There are other ways to shorten this code a little bit more, as I mentioned, but this actually will not change anything, and we'll get the same result. Okay, let's go through the third exercise together. So for this one, we want to create an array called items with these values, these strings. Then we want to create another array called plurals that maps over items and adds the letter S to the end of each of these strings. Then we want to print out each of the arrays. And then we have a little bonus here at the end, which is to see if we can make mouse return mice instead of what it's going to return if we don't do this. So let's see how that works together, but give it a shot yourself first. Okay, so I'm going to create const items, and this is going to be this array right here. All right, great. And we want to create another array called plurals. So I'm going to say plurals, and this is going to take items, it's going to map over it. And again, hopefully you're used to it. Your fingers getting nice and warmed up now. So here again, we have plural items. So I'm going to say we're going to get back each item, singular. And what do we want to do? We want to take the item, which is a string. So we're going to get light, for example, as item. And we want to add the letter S to the end of each one. So in JavaScript, we can do this a few ways. The easiest way is just to use kind of the default string concatenation using the addition operator. So we can actually return the item plus the S string, just like this. Single or double quotes, doesn't actually matter. Okay, so this will append S to that string and create a new string and return that back to us to put into that array, plurals. So if I console.log out items and I console.log out plurals as well, let's see what we get. Clear that out. I'll run node exercise 3, and look at that. So we have our original array, which is right here. Sorry for the split lines. This is just the size of my terminal. And the second array is the mapped array, right? Which is plurals. So we have lights, bananas, phones, books, and mouses. Now, if you're offended by seeing mouses, that's great. That's the purpose of step 4. Let's see what we can do about that. So technically speaking, you want to say mice, not mouses. Mouses sounds, I think, cuter in my opinion, but let's go with the correct mice, which is a plural. So what you'll see here, and the kind of intention behind this step 4, is that sometimes you might need to do custom things for certain values in these lists, right? So always keep that in the back of your mind. Is this a function that you can just blanket apply to every single element in the list, or are there a lot of custom things you need to do for certain elements? And that might dictate how you create these functions that you pass into map, or whether you even use map at all or use some other tool. Okay, so before returning item plus S, we want to check if the item is equal to mouse. Capital M, no, lowercase m, mouse. There we go, just like that. And if it is equal to mouse, which is this last item right here in the array, right? If it's the string mouse, and this is triple equals, then what do we want to do? Well, we want to return the string mice, right? Otherwise, we want to return the string that we get plus the S. Okay, so we have a special case here. We're going to do an early return. We can only return one time in a function, and it's the first return that gets hit returns us out of that function. So in this case, if the item is mouse, we enter step 17, in my code case, and we never get to line 19 in the case of mouse. Line 19 will run for every other item, light, banana, phone, and book. So if I run this, let's see what happens. There we go. We have lights, bananas, phones, books, and mice, which is the intended output. Perfect. Now, I couldn't help myself. I had to create a bonus exercise for this. I'm probably going to do this for filter and reduce as well. So I want to tease your brain as much as I can, so let's get to that one. I wasn't joking when I said that these are some of my favorite methods in JavaScript. So for this bonus, I want to start by creating an array called row. And row is going to be this list or this array of 5 numbers, 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50. Then I want to create another array called matrix. And matrix is going to map over row, which we've already seen so far. And for each item, we want to put that item in an array. And we want to print out both of these arrays. So matrix, which is the mapped array, the copy, should look like this weird thing right here, right? This is actually a 2-dimensional array, hence the matrix. If we were to get kind of further into JavaScript, we can actually do a lot of crazy things with this, like create images and many other interesting things. And this is just the start of it. So an array of arrays. This might seem complicated. However, don't fret too much about it. Just try to think hard about how do you return an array and put the item inside of it. I'll give you a moment to try that out. Okay. So for this one, let's start with the easy part, which is row, and that's going to equal to this list of numbers right here. Oops, put that on a separate line. Then step 2, which is the interesting part, we want to create a new array called matrix, which is going to look like this, and we're going to map over row. Okay, and we're going to say map, and we're going to give this a function. Now, since this is called row, kind of, arbitrary, like what are we going to put in here? I'll just say for each maybe number, since I know that this is a number. Okay, maybe not the best choice of variable, maybe you chose something else. Doesn't really matter in this case, as long as you chose something that makes sense to you, that has some meaning. All right. So what we want to do is we want to return back number, but we want to return it back as an array. Okay, so let's see what happens really quick. I want to first return back number just like this, and I want to console log out row, and I want to console log out matrix. And if I run this, we'll see that we get the same array. Technically, it's not the same array. This second array, which is line 22, which is matrix, is actually a copy, so it's in a different location in memory, as we saw in the previous video on how this is actually allocated inside the computer. But it's not doing anything. We're just basically taking row and making a copy of it. Okay, so we almost have what we want, but we are kind of missing the fact that each of these items, 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50, need to be in an array. So there's a few ways to do this. The easiest way to do this really is just to put square brackets around number like this. Okay, I'm going to show you another way in a second. But this is saying create an array and put number inside that array and then return that array. Okay, so if I run this, you'll see that this actually works. Right, we get back an outer array, and that outer array consists of elements, 5 elements in this case, that are also themselves arrays, but each of them only has one item in this case. Okay, so this is quite interesting. I just want to show you another way that we could do this. What we could do is we could say const, I guess we could say array, and that's going to be an empty array. And in the previous videos we saw on the basics of arrays, we know that we can add an item to an empty array, or any array really, by saying array.push, and we can push the number onto this array. And instead of returning a number as an array like that, we can just return this array that we created custom inside of each iteration of this function. Okay, and if I run this, you'll see that we actually get the same result. Okay, definitely a bit more wordy. The previous one might seem simpler, but there are just many ways to do this, even more than these two that I just showed you. Okay, I hope that that was fun and provided some tease or some challenge for your brain. If you'd like more exercises like this, please post in the comments and let me know. I really love coming up with these and kind of going through them together, really to get as much practice as we can. This really is something that you want to practice as much as possible and get used to using as much as possible. If you did find it valuable, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. As well as I'd love to hear in the comments any other solutions that you might have come up with, any alternatives, or if you just want more exercises and want me to maybe post a couple more for all of you. That said, in the next video, what we're going to go over is one of my other favorite functional methods on arrays called filter. And filter is going to work very similar to map with one small change, which is going to allow us to actually change what actually goes into the ending array instead of always just doing something for each item in the array. And the crazy thing is eventually going to be that we can actually combine these together in various interesting ways. I can't wait to see you there. I'll see you in that video.